Welcome, everybody. Time for another installment on my series on Samson. I'm going to call this one Samson's Descent, and this will be part 11 of my Samson series. It came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Shorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lies, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. Judges 16, 4-6. Now Samson, like so many other of God's servants, has served as a prophetic type of Christ, as I think I have shown you. His birth, ministry, marriage, extraordinary exploits in the power of the Holy Spirit were all prophetic pre-telling of the coming of the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, and the salvation that he would accomplish. But Samson was not Jesus. He was an imperfect man, and toward the end of his ministry, he loved a woman named Delilah. In a kind of inversion of the original marriage in chapter 14, the woman was bribed in order to get her to find out the secret of Samson's strength. 1,100 each from the lords of the Philistines. That'd be 5,500 pieces of silver. That is a lot of money. Now, it is very likely, in my view, that there is a significant difference between this woman, Delilah, and Samson's wife. Delilah was not a Philistine, as many assume. I don't think, anyway, but an Israelite. Now, this is just my opinion, but there are several factors that point to this. Number one, she lived in an area that was Judahite territory. And number two, if you look at this story, Samson feels extremely comfortable to the point of being totally unguarded with her. And number three, the Philistines had to pay quite a large bribe to get her to betray him. In other words, she had no natural or patriotic loyalty to them. So it cost a lot. Number four, the textual similarities between what she did and what Judah did in chapter 15, and most notably, the story about binding him with ropes. Now, in his overconfidence, Samson took Delilah's entreaties as a kind of game. Samson said unto her, If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Well, then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. And she said unto him, The Philistines are on you, Samson. And he broke the withs, as a thread of tow is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not known. Judges 16, 4-8. Now I want to point out something that I used to assume the opposite, but I see by the text that I was wrong. And that is that the Philistines did not jump out of hiding. As soon as he broke those withs, they knew not to fight him. So he still didn't know they were there. Delilah may indeed have been an Israelite, someone Samson trusted as an insider, and with whom he could troll the Philistines with his silly games. But in her heart, she was as Philistine as anybody. Delilah had more affinity with the pagans, taking the sides of God's enemies for pay. Let me quote again. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith you might be bound. Wherewith you might be bound. How are you going to be bound? He said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then I'll be weak and be as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes, bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines are on you, Samson, and there were liars in wait abiding in the chamber. And he broke them off from his arms like a thread. And Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto you've mocked me. You told me lies. Tell me wherewith you might be bound. And he said unto her, If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with the pin and said unto him, The Philistines are on you, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. So he had a weaver's beam woven into his head. Judges 16, 9-14. As far as Samson was concerned, the game just went on, trolling Delilah and the Philistines. What he was doing was making fun of the pagan belief in magic, and he was offering to her ridiculous solutions to the mystery of Samson's magical power. Yet, though, Samson was insensitive to the danger he was flirting with. It's really important. Each time he came closer to revealing the secret, just think about the third joke, weaving his hair. That's as close as you can get. Delilah's impatience manifested itself in tears. She cried and accused Samson of not loving her. Day after day, she nagged him until he wearied of it and broke down, believing still that he was confiding in an insider. I quote, she said unto him, How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You've mocked me these 3 times. You haven't told me wherein thy great strength lies. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death. Then he told her all his heart and said unto her, There is not come a razor on my head, for I've been a Nazarene unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I'll become weak and be like any other man. Judges 16, 15-17. Now Delilah knew as soon as she heard this that Samson wasn't playing anymore. He had just revealed to her the secrets of his heart and strength. Immediately she sent for the Philistines and received her 5,500 pieces of silver for betraying the Messiah. Now Samson should have remembered the nagging of his earlier wife and how that led her to betray him. But blinded by his own lust, he ignored the danger signals. Delilah, summoning the powers of her feminine charm, put him to sleep on her knees. And think about that. And called for a barber who sheared Samson's head. We are told then that Delilah herself was able to afflict Samson. Now this word afflict is the same word as the description of what Egypt had done to Israel and what the Philistines wanted to do to Samson themselves. This affliction of Delilah serves as a startling prophetic picture of Israel's series of captivities and bondages throughout her history. Like Samson, Israel should have been strong through grace to overcome her enemies, but because she'd been seduced time and again into playing the harlot, Israel had been weakened and even made subservient as a penalty for forsaking God. The strong man now in this story is reduced to lying on the lap of a bitter enemy. He doesn't even know it, and being tormented and afflicted by a harlot. When Samson awoke, he assumed that all would be as before, but he had been shorn of his hair. Now remember, and I have this in parentheses on my blog, remember it was never really merely the hair, but what the unshorn head pointed to, i.e., total devotion to God himself. There was nothing magic about Samson's hair. It was the Nazarite vow of his life by which God empowered him in grace, which made him so strong. Now that vow had been broken. Wow. The Philistines blinded Samson, hoping this would keep him from ever fighting them again, should his strength somehow return. They didn't know. But in blinding Samson, they were demonstrating to all the true spiritual condition, not only of Samson, but Israel. Like Samson, she had played the harlot with foreign culture and gods, and as a result was weakened and blinded and in captivity to her enemies. Now finally, Samson is attached to a circular grain grinding mill, just like you would an ox. He would grind grain as a slave. But the Philistine god, Dagon, was the god of grain. In their view, Dagon had prevailed over Yahweh, and the servant of Yahweh was now the slave of Dagon. Israel, in a larger sense, was in the same position, and for the same reasons. As the newly blinded and shorn Samson toiled in humiliation, walking in circles, chained to a millstone lever, and mocked by his enemies, in the very city, Gaza, in which he had carried off the city gates once, one small detail remained unnoticed. His hair began to regrow. Shalom, everybody.